Okay. Welcome to D Infinity Live. My name is Robert Gruber. Welcome to the show. This is our first show. We're very happy to have everyone on board to watch tonight. D Infinity is a multi-platform show about gaming of all styles. Tonight we have our co-hosts from Kentucky, William Thrasher. Good evening, William.
Hello, hello, everybody.
We also have from California, Richard Balsley. Good evening, Richard.
Hey.
And from the Hill Country, deep in the heart of Texas, Michael Varola. Good evening, Mike.
Yeah.
So tonight we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of different things. We're going to be talking about gaming modifiers and how modifiers are used in games. We're going to have a discussion about the games that we've been playing, the projects that we've been working on this week. And later on, we'll have an interview with Daniel Burrow from Cracked Monocle Games and his awesome steampunk role-playing game Tephra, which we have the cool book right here. We're really excited to have Daniel on for our first inaugural episode. As you can tell, we're still trying to get the bugs out, but I expect we'll be doing this a lot better in the future. So just bear with us. But let's go ahead and get right on into it. I'd like to introduce, of course, once again, Richard Balsley. Richard, you wrote a series of articles on the Skirmisher forums about gaming modifiers in your Anatomy of a Game Design column. Can you give us just kind of an overview of what you wrote and what we're going to be talking about tonight?
Sure. Well, as a game designer, it's kind of one of those funny things. It's like, well, what exactly is a modifier? What do you use them for? And it was one of those things. It's like I couldn't answer that question. And as a designer, I thought I really should be able to answer this question. And so it was an exploration of what modifiers are, how they've been used in various games, to include board games. And the results that I came up with were a little shocking. And, that's essentially what the article's about, is somewhat of a self-discovery in regards of, my craft. And I went from there.
Right. And you talk about the history of modifiers and how they link to wargaming. In what way are the similarities between the modifiers that we have today, like in 4th edition or Dungeons and Dragons, and the modifiers that were in those old wargamings?
They're essentially the same, believe it or not. A lot of the modifiers that we use in role-playing games and even some board games came straight from the world of war games. I mean, in large part, it's because that's what role-playing games are. They're an outgrowth of war games. I mean, Gary Gygax, when he worked on Dungeons and Dragons, the first incarnation was Chainmail, which is based off of Little Wars. And so I mean, if you read the foreword for the Skirmisher version of the book, Gary talks about that issue. So, I mean, it's a direct inheritor of the mechanics from war games. And then, when you went from Chainmail to the original edition of Dungeons and Dragons, the modifier didn't really change all that much. If anything, the characters, had these levels of like hero, superhero, and so on and so forth. And what those levels entailed was mostly how many times they got to attack, or how big of a bonus they got to their dice roll.
Well, Richard, on the subject of modifiers, do you think they work? Do you think they're useful, or are they just a holdover from an earlier era of game design?
Well, I think they still work, but in some parts they are holdovers. I mean, they need to be updated. And one of the issues that I realize is that for the most part, they're still stuck in that mindset of it's an issue of position. It's not based off of anything other than the strength of your position compared to your opponents.
You mean like a flanking bonus, for example?
Yes, exactly. And even if it's something that's related to equipment or your level of skill for something that's non-physical, it's your relationship or at least your character's relationship in that area of expertise against whatever it is that you're attempting to do. It's still in many ways an attack against that object to try to solve the puzzle, whatever it may be.
So why is that not necessarily a good thing?
Well, because not everything is necessarily an issue of strength of position. There's some of these things are relative to the character. I mean, I understand that some of the bonuses are supposed to be circumstantial, but even in the capacity as a circumstance, they're still rated as some kind of strength when they're not really a strength. And so most mechanics still carry that old mindset of the rules of well, if it's raining and our troops are better trained to handle this weather condition than yours,
gotcha,
it's going to be better.
So you've posted the first 4 parts of that article to the Skirmisher forum at skirmisher.com, and you've got 4 more to go. Is that correct?
No, just one more. Thankfully, it's not that long. I mean, it was over 4,000 words, but it's now closing in on the end of it. And for the last section, I talk about 2 games that I think help set a trend to move away from that position. I mean, it's not much of a change, but it's still a slight change.
Well, Richard,
go ahead, William.
Just I guess one last thing for me. You talk about the example of, okay, it's raining on the battlefield, but our troops have special training to deal with the rain. Shouldn't that matter?
No, it does matter, and I think that that's still an appropriate use of a modifier, but not every skill is necessarily going to fall under that that option. Because say you're doing research as a character, your character is very book learned, or a scholar of some sort, right? You're doing some kind of science thing. Your discovery, in that particular situation, or the character's attempt to solve a scientific riddle or find an obscure piece of information in a database, isn't an issue of strength or a position of strength. It's an issue of how well they know how to use their tools, and that's not really strength based as much as it is just know-how and luck.
Well, couldn't that though then be the strength of your intellect?
No, not really, because that's already figured in terms of how smart the character is. But you're talking about a database. A database doesn't really have any kind of encryption in it necessarily. Like, say you go to your local library and you're trying to find an article from a newspaper that might have been written 10 years ago. And if you don't know the exact title, or if you're not quite sure what it is the information contains, unless you know the correct keywords, you're not going to be able to find that. So that's more an association of linguistics than it is of strength of any kind.
Gotcha.
And Richard, we were talking about modifiers, but it seems like mostly we're talking about additions to a die roll. But in some systems like World of Darkness or Shadowrun, they actually use number of dice. Can you talk a little about that and the differences between the two?
Yeah, and this is actually what I thought was interesting about the World of Darkness system, which is part of the last installment, is that the change, as slight as it may seem in terms of semantics, is that they're relative strengths of relative position, because dice pools, especially in the instance of World of Darkness, it's one of each die is separate. It has no effect on the other dice as they're rolled. Now you may get to re-roll a dice because they hit a natural 10 for the World of Darkness, but the chance of success on any one given die does not change no matter how many dice they are. What actually changes is your likelihood of success overall, but the dice themselves are independent of each other, so that makes them relative rather than some kind of cohesive whole, the way say modifiers for D20 work, where you have a plus 10 to your roll because of your skill or because of your base attack bonus. It's still the same thing. It's a flat bonus that skews the curve for that system.
Right, and let me just say, if anyone out there has any questions for Richard, you can tweet them to us at DInfinityLive. You can also leave a comment down in the bottom of the YouTube video. I'm watching those comments as well, and we'll get you that at the end of the show. Mike, did you have any other comments?
I was just going to point out for anybody who's listening who might not know this, that the Skirmisher site and the Skirmisher forums are very interactive. So if anybody who reads Richard's, it's his personal blog in this case, has any comments on it, they're certainly welcome to leave a comment to his post or anything else on the site, because we really do encourage game design to be an interactive process, and we do want people to weigh in with their ideas and their opinions. So certainly I'd encourage people to go to skirmisher.com and check out what Richard's doing with this article, but the great stuff that all of us have actually been doing on the site.
Right, exactly. Richard, what other types of modifiers are there besides just numbers and numbers of dice? Are there additional ones, or what are people doing that's not modifiers in the traditional sense?
I think some game systems have addressed it with changing the die size, or as a step. Or using the terminology of a die code, and like going from a D4 to a D6. I mean, you can't go from a D4 to a D2 necessarily. Some systems do, and it still has the same effect as saying maybe D4 -1. I mean, your average changes. You go from a 2.5 to a 1.5. Just looking at the math, but that's pretty much all that there is. I mean, maybe in part it's a limitation on the form. I can't say for sure. I mean, I think more people have to play with it. I don't think a lot of study has been done in this vein in order for us to nail down and like a definite thing saying, well, that's all it can be.
Right. There seems like there's room for growth in the industry. I think if we're seeing even 40, 45, 50 years after the initial war games and the games that came before Dungeons and Dragons, if we're still seeing relics of those in today's games, do you think that that's a problem? And if it is, do you see a next evolution, a next step in the evolution of games?
No, I don't necessarily see it as a problem. I mean, it's part of the legacy of the field, if anything else. I mean, it can be a concern, especially with people who are essentially rules lawyers, which will be a focus of another piece that I want to do about why the math and the language don't necessarily work together as well as we would like them to. And I think that's one of the reasons why this is an issue. And like why I say that the difference between World of Darkness' system and others is a relative strength of relative position, which might seem like it's kind of like skirting the issue. But in fact, I think that's the slow change. I mean, like everything else, we have to work trial and error, just like any other game design issue. And that's pretty much where we're at right now. Is we're still trying to see if there's a way around the dice in such a way that we don't destroy the randomness issue, without also removing this concept of the relative aspect of what it is we're doing and why.
But Rob, as far as relics of systems go, I would venture to say that the word relic sort of diminishes the extent to which some of these legacy mechanisms still exist. Probably.
Let's go with legacy.
What's that?
Yeah.
Let's just say legacy.
Yeah, I would say legacy. I mean, if you take a look at Warhammer 40K, go to any big gaming convention, and everyone's playing Warhammer 40K, and I'd say 1/10 of 1% of the people who are playing have actually read H.G. Wells's Little Wars, which he released in 1913. Well, if you read H.G. Wells's Little Wars and then you play any modern tabletop war game, to include the most popular ones with proprietary systems, you will be absolutely stunned at the similarities in the mechanics that are presented there. In the last 99 years since Wells came out with his rules, it's amazing what has changed as compared to what hasn't changed in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that. Looking at Advanced Squad Leader, which is pretty much like the the 800-pound gorilla kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, that's the one you go to if you want to see just how in depth you can get with these kinds of systems. Now you compare that to some of these other systems like Warhammer. There's not a lot of difference. But if you look at Flames of War, there is a twist on how the mechanics are presented. They're still the same, but the twist is that rather than looking at the units themselves and what you roll becomes your chance to hit, in Flames of War, the roll is to see if your unit evades being hit.
Right.
So, I mean, part of it is, and that's why I was talking about, doing a new piece on the issue of rules lawyering, because that's where I think language and math have this problem where they're not really interacting. We're using the same mechanics, but we're relabeling in such a way that we're not changing what the game does, just our perception of what's going on.
Yeah, and that perception, I think, is probably the key. One more note I had, Richard, is you talked a little about Hero System in part 4 of your article, along with GURPS and BESM. Hero System is always that game that I always wanted to play, but never could get people around to do it. But I was just curious as to your opinions on Hero System and how they fit in with this particular article.
Well, I think it's a really good system in regards of trying to capture everything, like every contingency, or at least the majority of them, but also that can be its downfall, especially if players are not experienced enough to really get that. They might not be able to, use the system as effectively as they could, but, having an internal system works to its advantage to help avoid that, because once you've built your characters and you know your equipment and everything else, then all you need to reference are the numbers on your character sheet. So that is a saving grace for the most part. I mean, that's why like GURPS and even BESM work the way they do, is, being a open-ended effects-based point-buy system where you have a set group of properties that have game mechanics attached, but then you can use them to make whatever you want, basically results in having sort of a chaotic jumble, unless you have that use of a modifying system where most everything is rolled under what's on your character sheet, so that you don't have to reference any tables.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We're going to end that conversation there. Thanks, Richard, for the insight. Make sure that if you want to read Richard's articles, Anatomy of Game Design Modifiers, you can check it out on skirmisher.com. Part 4 is up now. Part 5 will be out Sunday. Is that right, Richard?
Yes, I've been releasing them about every 4.5, 5 days, just so I could space it out. Originally, it was going to be one whole blog, but 4,000 words is a little excessive.
So every 2d4 plus 1 days, you've been releasing one?
Yes.
And the +1 is a modifier, which is a relic, legacy of the old. Thanks, Richard. We appreciate it. We're going to move on. We're going to bring in Daniel now. Daniel Bro from Cracked Monocle. Cracked Monocle creates the Tephra role-playing game, which we have. Will and I both have copies of. We're both enjoy it. Daniel, welcome to the show, sir. Oh, we having some technical problems. 1 second. I can't hear you, bud. While we work out the technical problems, still can't hear you.
How about now?
Now we can hear you. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hey, glad to be here.
So tell us a little about what Tephra is.
Tephra is a steampunk role-playing game that me and my company developed. It just uses a single D12, pretty easy to get into. I like to call it a heroic steampunk game, in the fact that it's alternate world, so it's not your classic 1800s steampunk.
Right.
We took a lot of fantasy tropes and we very heavily steampunked them. Mm-hmm. We tried to do without magic. We like to believe that any significantly advanced science is, of course, indistinguishable from magic.
Right.
So why have fireballs when you can just throw explosives at people?
Right.
And that seems to be the kind of the trick of steampunk, and I know that we have a lot of your fans watching tonight, but we also have a lot of fans that may not have heard of steampunk. What exactly is steampunk, and how does it connect into the role-playing world?
Sure. Steampunk is Victorian sci-fi at its absolute base. But what does that mean? It really means, like, if you go back and you look at H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, or, for most people, it's Wild Wild West.
Right.
All those things are very steampunk. It's, taking your top hat but adding crazy, wild technology to it and seeing what comes out.
And it's not, you say you're not using magic, but you're using technology, but it seems like a lot of things in Tephra, like you say, are indistinguishable from magic, the things that power weapons and powered ships and things like that. Is that something that you set out to do from the very beginning, to just pull that whole magic out of the fantasy and replace it with technology on the whole?
It wasn't a goal in the beginning. It eventually became one of our goals, was that we'll be looking through, Dungeons & Dragons spell lists, and we'd be like, oh, well, if we put a magnet here and a big steam engine there and some crazy electricity there, we can have the same effect. So, it all kind of became, one big magical technology extravaganza.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I just have a few questions. My first, after looking through the system, was why did you go with the D12? Was it to fit the feel of the game, or was there a mathematical-based reason for why you chose that?
Both. All three, I'm going to say. We chose a D12, number one, to be different. There's not really any other mainstream games out there that just use a single D12. So we wanted something that, is unused, but it's also eye-catching, but can also be iconic. We want people to pick up their D12 and say, oh, this is what I use to play Tephra with.
Right.
The other part of that is, yes, it fits within our world well. We call our system Clockwork System. Just like the Clockwork has 12 faces, we use a D12. Mathematically, no, I'm sorry.
Do you have a question, Mike?
No, I just said, no, I apologize. I didn't mean to cut it. I just said that was an elegant tie-in. I just like what Daniel is saying. You can really see the whole, thematic angle they took with this. It's very appealing.
Mathematically, I think the D12 is just very unique. It rolls funny. It never does what anyone expects. It's the hardest dice to keep in the table, from what I can tell. But the D12, it doesn't give you a very even spread like a 2d6 would. And that's something that we kept going back and forth was, if we make this a 2d6 system, it'll be so much easier to get people into. Everyone has 2 d6s sitting around. But the D12 gave us a very interesting layout that we just came to enjoy.
Okay. And then my next question would be, the game seems to be limited to 12 levels. I know it says 12 plus, but given the way that the mechanics work, certain things don't seem to progress beyond that. And character advancement looks like it's the same from one level to the next. Is this rooted in the types of stories that fit the setting, or how you want the system to work?
Again, both. It has 12 levels just because I didn't want a system that went on forever and ever. I wanted a solid glass ceiling for players to strive towards. And I also really did not want charts in our book. That was something that we were against from the get-go. We wanted to nix as many charts as possible. When you level up, I don't want you going back and looking, going, oh man, I wonder, okay, I'm level 3 now, what does that give me? No, I want it to be very cut and dry, like, oh, I gained a level, so I'm going to go get my one specialty, I'm going to level up, and we're done.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, I thought it wasn't really elegant in a way to handle it, and I just was wondering if there was something more to it than that. It was just like you were going to adapt this setting from one, or adapt the system so that way you make changes based on the setting. But that sounds really great. And I was going to also say, I like how smooth the system seems to flow, and find it intriguing how you set up the tiers, skills, specialties, and the use of science to create new objects. Mm-hmm. And I know you've had this inclusion of various races normally associated with fantasy, and given the feel of how the game works overall, I was wondering, do you plan to introduce magic in future expansions, since the rules hint at it, like that you've laid the groundwork for it? I mean, I know that you said that you guys were kind of moving away from it, but it seems like you left the door open for that.
Mm-hmm. No, well, I can either. Sorry, I just got a knock on my door. No. I can neither confirm nor deny whether we're going to be adding magic. The system.
I hear your puppy.
Yeah.
Live television.
Fiber. Hush. Sorry.
He wants his hat back.
I'm sorry. Magic. You stop that. I have heavily considered adding a magic system into the game. What I've considered doing is a very Victorian type of science, where it's a little bit more like either magician or occult type magic. You know, I want to stray away from a lot of the fantasy aspects of magic as much as possible, but you know, I can't really say, you know, how our magic would take shape if we added magic in. But I can say that our goal is to avoid adding too many more fantasy elements as time goes on.
Okay.
Something I wanted to say, and no disrespect meant to the good professor, but I want to thank you for not having your head up Tolkien's ass.
Yeah, well, that's always a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really sold me on this game was the races. It was not it's not at all what I expected. Yes, you've got gnomes and satyrs. Your elves aren't really standard fantasy elves. They're more like what I think most people would probably associate with trolls. By the way, I also got to hand it to you with including the satyr. They're my favorite kind of humanoid fantasy race.
One of my favorites too.
They never get enough play. But
Hefra elves are bustier than normal elves.
Pardon?
Hefra elves are bustier than normal elves.
Right.
But I did have a question. Well, you know, part of the setting is that the elves, you know, are the reason they're sort of, you know, so troll-like is because of supposedly some, you know, horrible thing. They did some horrible thing in the past and were cursed, and that there's the other race, the Farishta, are more like what people would assume are as traditional fantasy elves. They're elves that have undergone this transmutational process that makes them these beautiful, pure, sort of ethereal beings. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, that reminded me of the elf origin story from the comic book Poison Elves. Was that at all an influence on you, or am I just reading a connection into my own mind?
You know, I've actually never heard of Poison Elves, so I can't really say there.
Yeah, it's all without drowning anybody in comic book info. What it comes down to is that there are trolls, and a god created the elves by burning away all the terrible stuff on trolls to make what we now know as elves. And I saw like some really heavy echoes of that, and I really like that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, designing all of our races was rather fun and rather a handful. They're definitely very different from your normal Tolkien fare.
Oh, I like the random racial traits. I do. That's one thing that, from my own stance with game design, when you're designing a race, it's very easy to get bogged down with every possible weird anatomical feature or social feature that race might have and what benefits or hindrances that might bring to a particular character. I like that your system just boils it down to a roll of a D12, determines what special advantage you get, what extra special advantage you get from your race, and then that's it. You don't have to worry about all the other stuff.
Yeah, and that was one of the oldest things that we had in our system that survived all the way to the end. Was right when we started, we were like, oh, we're gonna have random racial traits since we're using a D12, and we never got rid of it. Though there was some debate over the fact, since I don't know, I don't like random things. They freak me out, especially in character creation, because I want to have that control over my character as I create their backstory. But we always say, if you don't like the random racial traits, just choose one of them. They're all equal.
Well, except for the ones that let you pick 2 racial traits.
Well, there has to be some hand wavium there.
Yeah.
Mike, you got a question?
I had a different kind of question. I know that you're located up in the Austin, Texas area, Daniel. And I wanted to ask whether that's where you're from, and if not, what brought you there, and whether you found that to be a good environment to be running a game company out of.
Sure. I was actually born and raised in Austin. I love Austin, and I've always thought it was a great place for anything creative, tech-oriented, just fun stuff. I currently live down in San Marcos just because this is pretty much where 80% of my company lives, and there's no reason for me to leave. But no, Austin's been great for us. Being able to go up to Dragon's Lair every week and run games has just been a really phenomenal experience. And being able to meet all these different people that live in Austin, do all this networking, yeah, Austin's a great place.
And it's ironic that you're in San Marcos. I'm down in Canyon Lake, That's where Skirmisher is headquartered in Canyon Lake. So geographically, we're about 30 miles from each other right now, but we only ever see each other in Houston, which is about 200 miles from here.
Yeah, well, conventions bring us together.
That's right. That's right.
That's right. And Houston is known for a lot of conventions. We have Comic Palooza now and Space City Con and OwlCon. So yeah, Houston is a big hub, a hub for cities. Richard had a question about stories.
Yeah, I was kind of curious. What led you to adding the mechanic for stories such as the background things or belonging to different groups? Because I thought it was kind of interesting. Especially with things like librarian as a potential choice, or even something that's racially based. I thought it was just really cool.
Well, so for a little background for people who haven't looked at Tephra, we have a system that we call Stories, which is in many ways kind of like, we always compare it to like the Xbox achievement system. It's something where you can go in and you can say, okay, my character used to be a librarian. So because he's a librarian, he gains a very small bonus to researching things in the library. And we only touch on it a little bit in our core book, and where we really get into it is our adventures. Because, like we said, there's only 12 levels that you can gain. So how do we give you something in between those levels? Well, you can craft your own gear, so we don't need to give you a whole lot of items. And 12 experience points, you level up. There's not a whole lot of places to go. So we give you stories. Stories are different ways that you can say, oh, my character got bombed in the city bombing, and now he has a ringing in his ear. It's kind of our SCAR system, if you will. And at the end of every adventure, the narrator can go down our list of adventure reward stories and say, oh, well, you qualify for this, you qualify for that. Which ones do you want?
Cool. Yeah, one of the things that I really liked about it is that it gives and you call it a narrator, not a game master, and I think that's a very, very important distinction, because a lot of times, as your sidebar in the book says, a lot of times the game master seems like they're in control of everything, which is true to a certain degree, but as a narrator, you are the game master is trying to tell a story with the player, so it seems less of a competitive thing between players and the game master. Where did that come from, and why did you decide to take that direction with it?
I really look at the way that I narrate games, and the way that some of my coworkers narrate games. And what we realized was that there's, talking just between different dungeon masters and game masters, is that a lot of the times we don't really feel like we're in control of the story. We just feel like we are there giving you the background information, giving you the other characters, and we're letting the players run everything. But the other part is that Tephra was built to basically take the system away from the narrator. We wanted the game to feel like the player knows everything that the player needs to know. The narrator knows a little bit about the system, and as long as those two things come together, you're happy. You don't need to know everything in the book. That's not what's important. So we wanted a narrator instead of a game master.
Diana Lopez on our YouTube channel says, hooray for librarians.
Excellent.
Will has a question about the future of Tephra.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is the kind of thing you can confirm or deny. But I did have a question as far as the future Tephra goes. Would you at some point be amicable to doing an epic Tephra that covers levels 13 to 24, just keeping it within multiples of 12 to fit with the D12?
You kind of nailed it right on the head. We've been playing around with different concepts for how to take Tephra to level 24. We're calling it our late night edition, if you will. Our normal one is just your early morning, it's your AM. Well, eventually we'll get to the PM of the clock. But how we're going to do that, and which ways we're going to do that, and how we're going to rebalance everything to fit within that, we're not entirely sure at the moment. And we have 90 expansions to get through before we even consider that. So, yes, it's on the slate. How far from now? Nah, I can't tell you.
And so, what is the current future? What do you have coming out next? And how can our viewers find out more about what's coming up?
I really encourage people to look at our Facebook pages. Tephra, the Steampunk RPG, will take you right to our Facebook where we update things constantly. We're always active on there. And from there, you can go onto our site, crackmonocle.com, and get a whole lot of information about our upcoming releases and join our forums, which people are always going back and forth with. Oh man, I really want to make this character build, or how does that character build work, or if I put these two automatons together, what do I get? So our forums are a whole lot of fun. But what's on the docket right now? We are consistently doing PDF releases as just very minor supplements to the game. We've done an Armsmith update that had like turret crafting and shield crafting and ammo crafting. We had mementos, which are just like lucky items your character can pick up and carry around with them for little bonuses. Right now I'm working on an explosives packet, which is going to take what explosives we give you in the book and make them a whole lot bigger. As far as like the bigger books that we're looking at, we are currently, like just this week, we're going to playtesting on our first Trailblazer, the Industrial Carnage of Bale, which I love that title. But we basically take a 1920s style city that's very industrial, and we say, there are giant turf wars going on here. We're going to give you a little bit of lore about the city, and then we're going to ask you to tear it apart. It's full of building, destroying specialties, new automaton builds, and powered armor suits, which I think players are just going to love.
Yeah.
So
that sounds exciting to me. I like that idea.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, because hopefully that'll help it sell.
Well, I want to thank Daniel from Cracked Monocle, crackedmonocle.com. You can also check him out on Facebook. We'll have links in the underbar after the show. I'll also link to his YouTube down there. You can check that out. Thank you, Daniel. We appreciate you coming by and answering some of our questions tonight.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks for coming by.
Glad to have you.
All right. Well, that was awesome. I was glad we had Daniel. We'll hold up the book one more time. Tephra, you can get Tephra the Steampunk RPG right now. It's available. So we're going to move on here tonight. Guys, this is my favorite part of the show, where we talk about what we're playing. Mike, we're going to start with you tonight. You were playing something cool with the Advanced Civilization Online. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, there's an old Avalon Hill board game from back in the day called Advanced Civilization. And a lot of times people say, oh, you mean Sid Meier's Civilization? No, I mean an old school board game. And, as an old school gamer, I'm always on the lookout for board game simulators, something that will allow me to play an old school board game, but either on a play-by-email basis or just on the computer. So I've been playing a lot of Advanced Civilization lately, both with a computer simulation version of it, but I actually had to have somebody load a old version DOS simulator onto my computer to be able to play the game, because the board game simulator is that old. So a modern computer won't run the thing. So I actually had to retrofit the computer to be able to run this game. And then I'm playing a play-by-email version, and I'll get you the link for that, and we can post that on the archive version of this show. And it's really interesting in a lot of ways, because when I'm playing against the computer, I will make a strategic decision purely based on what pragmatically looks like the best thing to do. But these guys that I'm playing this play-by-email game with, I don't know them. They're just people who could be anywhere. But they get real peevish. They'll send me email messages. I mean, I have one guy who's sending me messages about launching some border war against me because one of his units got wiped out. I don't know if these guys are serious. I don't know if they're just getting into it. I've only been doing this a few months, and with a play-by-email game, the pace is just, glacial. So I'm still shaking it out, but I'm going to write an article about this for my blog on the Skirmisher site. about both versions of the game that I'm playing, and then I'm going to email it out to everybody who I'm playing in 5 different play-by-email games with. They're that slow that I ended up signing up for 5 of them, so I'd once in a while have something going on. And I'm going to email all 30 of the people I'm playing these games with and see what kind of a response I get. So.
Now, you've also been playing, we were talking about this the other day, the Catan card game.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I have a copy of it there. With the expansion, though.
No, I'm playing a different game. Or
you're playing the update. This is the old one.
I'm playing Rivals of Catan.
Right.
Which is a 2-person card game. And is Rivals of Catan, is it a advanced version of that one you just held up?
It's the updated version. This is kind of the older set that came out in like 2004, 2003, 2004.
Right, whereas this one came out last year at Gen Con, and that's where I picked it up. It's a fun game. It's appealing in a couple of ways. One, mechanically, it's somewhat simpler than the board game. 2, it's set up for just 2 people. So that might seem like a limitation, but if you happen to live in the middle of nowhere with a wife, and she's the only person you end up playing games with on a day-to-day basis, having a good 2-person game has a lot to be said for it. So we've been playing it a lot. I can't win most of the time. 1, because she gets really, really mad if I do, but 2, because she is actually somewhat better at it than me. But it's a fun game, and we've enjoyed it quite a bit.
Right. One of the things, and I've played the older version. It's not dissimilar to Rivals. Just Rivals is more balanced. It's there's more cards. There's different things that are involved with it.
And it has the flavor of Catan, but it's also more character-driven in a lot of ways. So, for example, some of the cards you can play are actually characters of various sorts. And it doesn't get into a lot of depth. I mean, basically, the value of a character is that it either has a lot of strength points, or it has a lot of skill points, or it has some of both. So it isn't overly complex. But the characters can allow you to do some things you might not otherwise be able to do. And in addition to the 5 different commodities that are present in the basic board version of Catan, there's also gold is one of the commodities in this game and plays a major role in it. But the rules are scaled. You start off playing with 1 card deck, and then you move on and you try playing with a 2nd card deck. Then you play with a 3rd card deck, and then by the time you've done that, you combine all of the decks together into one big game. And, any experienced gamers will get to that point real fast and never go back.
Yeah, one of the things I had with the Catan card game was we tried that where we just shuffled everything together and played it, and it always felt the different expansions basically felt like they weren't put in well, but I've heard they've solved that problem.
Well, they have, because when I say throw all the cards together, I mean that in a very not a literal sense, because the different expansion sets are all kept in different decks. Mm-hmm. You're drawing off of different decks, and they only mix in as far as you mix them in your hand. But they don't all get mixed in together. So that gives a certain amount of balance and allows someone to pursue a certain strategy. So I like pursuing an era of gold strategy and building a merchant guild and really focusing on trade and gold. My wife, for example, prefers an era of progress strategy. She builds a university and uses the era of progress cards.
Excellent. Now, Will, I know you're playing a game that's on my list that I haven't been able to play yet. I first heard about through Will Wheaton's blog.
Oh, yeah.
And that's Cards Against Humanity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of playing that game a few times with my girlfriend and some of our friends. And the short of it, Cards Against Humanity is the bastard child of Apples to Apples that became a stripper that nobody and a drug addict that nobody likes to talk about in the family. It's like if you've played Apple to Apples, you have some idea how it goes. You've got a hand of cards which are like generally proper nouns or events, and then randomly these cards with sort of premises are revealed. and you want to try to play the card that you feel goes best with that premise, and then of course somebody judges it. But it's really crazy stuff. Like for instance, I'm sorry, Professor, but I couldn't complete my homework because of grave robbing. It's like really weird stuff. And the thing I've discovered about the game is, like, a lot of the humor of the cards does come from shock value. So if you're playing with people that have a really good sense of humor and are really trying to crack each other up, it is a great game. But if you're playing with people who are really trying to, I guess, for lack of a better term, trying to win, people who are trying to play it like a very serious game, the shock value completely goes away, and it's not as entertaining as it might be otherwise.
Is it a good drinking game? It sounds like it might be a good drinking game in a lot of ways.
I haven't played it as a drinking game, but it probably would make
I
a
just meant a game while you're drinking heavily. Is more like.
Oh yeah, it would be phenomenal for that. And the basic set comes with a whole bunch of house rules. There's a house rule that I keep wanting people to do, but no one ever agrees to it. The house rule is called Lando Calrissian, where whenever you play, cards are randomly drawn and played as if it was an extra player, and that invisible extra player is called Lando Calrissian, and if just by pure luck and randomness Lando Calrissian is the player that technically wins the game, everyone loses and gets the prize of shame. If I want to try that rule, I really want to, because I've played apples to apples, just playing random cards and comparing the likelihood of victory to when I'm seriously trying, and it's borne some interesting results. I really want to see that tried with this game. The game's only real downside is that the games tend to stretch on really, really long, because in my experience, whatever the goal of points that you're going for always gets set way too high, and that's combined with the fact that most people just want to keep playing until they use up all the cards. So games do tend to drag on. But if you're really into it, that's not a problem.
I've played apples to apples before, and it's not one of my favorite games, I'll be honest. But because I like games where there's a definite winner, there's a definite path to victory, and with games like apples to apples, there's no path to victory. You just have to know what the person who is the judge is going to pick, basically,
right,
based on what you have in your hand. But it seems like Cards Against Humanity is more of a shock, more of a funny thing. Do you think that that it's similar in apples to apples in that respect, that there isn't a path to victory except by knowing your friends?
Yeah, it really does come down to knowing who's going to be the judge that round. That being said, it's always a safe bet because if you don't have a really sharp sense of humor and the person judging doesn't really have a sharp sense of humor, just come up with the most offensive combination you can, and it's probably going to win.
Right. Well, I've been playing something kind of dark and serious. I've been playing Gloom here lately. Gloom is by Atlas Games, and it's designed by Keith Baker, who was formerly an Austinite but lives up in Portland now. I saw it for the first time being played on Tabletop, on Will Wheaton Show Tabletop. The second time I mentioned them on Must Be a Fanboy. But I love how they use clear cards. And each card, when you want to do something to somebody that's particularly nasty, you put a modifier card over it, which gives it a negative point. And the goal is you want to be able to have the lowest points as possible. So you play cards that have positive modifiers on the cards as well to give them bonuses. And the neat thing is you want to make your characters as miserable as humanly possible. So, like for instance, was burdened by boils gives them a -10, or tortured by poodles, and so on. And in the end, the key thing you want to do is to kill the character, and to kill the character, you flip it over and it shows that it's dead, and count up all your points. I really think it's an interesting game design. In the fact that it's opposite of what you normally expect in a game. You want to do bad things to your own characters and good things to other characters, and I think that's an interesting design space. I also have the other expansions as well, which we haven't played, we've enjoyed it quite a bit, and it acts sort of like a storytelling game in some ways, where you tell a story about what happened. The most interesting one is I had a character that's a dog. His name's Balthazar, and he apparently was married to a guy, and then was widowed at his wedding. So it was a very sad day for Balthazar. The other thing I've been playing recently is I've started a Pathfinder game, and I've been using Ultimate Equipment from Pazio. This is a really, as you can see, a really thick, big book, very much part of their core stuff, and has plenty of equipment and things that you can use in your Pathfinder game. One thing that I've started also doing, and Mike and Will both have worked on this, is using defects. In our Pathfinder game. I know defects was originally written for OSR, but maybe Will, you can talk for a minute about what defects are and what you've been working on with defects.
Yeah, well, Mike and I have been developing a full, because defects were originally a section in the original Nuisances book, and Mike and I have been developing it as a full supplement, a full standalone supplement. So what you get is the full defect system, and what defects are character traits. They're roughly equal in power to a feat, except that they're detrimental in some way. They make your character slower. They make your character dumber. They cause weird, inconvenient things to happen around your character. Like, to just give you an example, I just have, because not only am I writing part of the book, I'm doing all of the illustrations. I've got right here the illustrations for 2 defects. The first is Dumpster Diver, where anytime your character sees a pile of garbage, refuse, or just a lot of stuff that someone's thrown out, they have to make a will save, and if they fail a will save, they have to go picking through that garbage. And interestingly enough, the GM was within his rights to temporarily inflict the defect of malodorous on a dumpster diver after they failed the roll until they take a bath. And then this other illustration, this dwarf here, this is for excess beard. It's when your character has a beard so big it becomes inconveniencing for you. So if you have an excess beard, you're more vulnerable to attacks of opportunity because people can just grab your beard. You're more vulnerable to grapples because it gives people extra stuff to hold on to. You're more vulnerable to tripping because people can trip you up on your own beard. And that's just 2 of the ones we've been working on. It's proven to be a very sizable tome.
And I'd like to point out that some of the original defects that we wrote up, going back, I think, as far as 2004, were actually inspired by art in original Dungeons & Dragons and Wizards of the Coast books. So, for example, Declines to Use Quivers was based on that picture of that half-orc archetypal barbarian who has all sorts of arrows and daggers strapped to his leg. I think he's got a dagger tied to a board or something from his arm. And we said, wait a minute. Your dagger comes with a scabbard. Your character starts with a quiver. What would possibly prompt a character to tie an arrow to his leg? So we said, this is clearly a psychological aberration of some sort. So we actually wrote up Declines to Use Quivers and Declines to Use Scabbards, and there are game term effects for that. A character who declines to use quivers and has to take the arrow that's tied to his leg rather than remove one from a quiver reduces his rate of fire. The character who has to tie his dagger to a board attached to his arm suffers the chance of stabbing himself. So if you really tried to do stupid stuff like that in real life, there would be an effect. And the defects are farcical, but I would say 90% of all defects I've written up have been based on things I've seen people do. One of my favorite is won't look down. And basically, I've known people who won't look down. They walk across through their own homes and they kick things. I'm not going to say anyone by name because I will pay heavily if I do. But I know people who won't look at the floor and they constantly kick things. And I thought, my God, what if that applied to someone in a dungeon? What if you had a character in a dungeon who simply would not look down and thus never noticed pressure plates or tripwires or scorpions or so a lot of the defects are based on observable things that we've taken to the absurd extreme and said, okay, this is what happens when somebody acts this way in their home. What would happen if they acted this way in a dungeon or wilderness environment?
Yeah, and actually, speaking of stuff like that, one of the things we came up with that is really fun are, because we have there's defect categories. There's basic defects, combat defects, meta magic defects. One of the things we came up with were meta game defects, which are defects that affect the player just about as much as they affect the character, and really kind of blur that line. And this is actually, and a lot of those are based on player behavior. Like one of them is Curse's Fate, where anytime you roll a natural 1, if your character has this and you roll a natural 1, the character has to spend the next full round action yelling about how the dice are unfair and the game system's broken. Or another great one. This is my favorite, just because of there are players I have totally wanted to inflict this kind of defect on. It's called existentially ignorant, and if your character has the defect existentially ignorant, the player of that character is not allowed to read a rule book at the table. They can't hold it. They can't open it. They can't borrow it. If they have a rules question, someone else they can't look it up. Someone else has to do it.
So Mike, it seems like there's a lot of design space in defects, similar to how there's design space in feats as well. And I found one of the most interesting things that I found about it was using defects as prerequisites to really powerful feats.
Oh yeah.
Like Will's defect, the big beard. I created a feat that was a beard of holding, where you had to have this huge beard, and then you would get a beard of holding, which could hold things for you. Did you see that kind of design space early on?
We've been talking about that. That's something that has happened accidentally. Even in nuisances, we had a couple of defects where we said, oh, well, if you really did have this defect, and keep in mind, one of the black letter rules of defects is they cannot do anything good.
Right.
So when, once in a while we would have players who would say, oh, well, my character's a monstrous lookalike. So he looks all scaly. He's going to pass himself off with a lizard man. No, monstrous defect only makes humans think you're a lizard man. Lizard men don't think you're a lizard man. There's no upside to having a defect intrinsically to itself. But we have looked at having them be prerequisites then to things that would allow you to do something. So in the aforementioned example, something that would give you a substantial modifier on a disguise skill check for a particular type of monster if you had a monstrous look-alike character. That's just a for example. That's not a very exciting or dramatic one. That would be a simple example of how one of these might work. So we're looking at developing a bunch of those because those are a lot of fun. And in games where the game master has decided that the characters all need to have some defect, it's actually pretty fun. I mean, go to a game convention and tell me there's such a thing as a character without a defect. I think the idea that you would have a party where everyone had some defect, and they don't all have to be dramatic, some are passive. A sickly character has -2 on all fortitude saves. So they don't all play a dramatic role. A character who's a junkie, on the other hand, is constantly going to be trying to just scrape mold off of dungeon walls and smoke it in, their little pipe. I mean, so some are passive, some are active. Passive ones are very easy to balance because they're just flip sides of one, like great fortitude. The active ones are the most fun.
Yeah, and we're not totally cruel. These aren't just horrible things you can do to players and characters. We do have a mechanic where the idea is when you qualify for a bonus feat, you can use the system to take a defect, and that defect gives you the ability to choose an additional bonus feat.
Yeah,
so we do
balanced.
have game balance in mind, and there is a benefit to players taking the defects in addition to just making more interesting characters.
And just as no feat is going to win the game for you. A feat can affect the outcome of a certain situation. But for the most part, a good feat is a balanced feat, and that's the whole idea with defects. A good GM is not going to allow a defect to kill you. If you've got allergies and you sneeze when you're outside a door about to ambush someone, yeah, that could throw off the outcome of the encounter. But you can't sneeze and if you have the allergy defect, go into anaphylactic shock and die just because you get stung by a bee. So defects are not fatal; they're not lethal. They could lead to bad outcomes for you, but they are no more powerful than a defect. Or
only one defect will kill you, and that's the defect expiration date, where your character has a very limited lifespan.
Right. Don't take that one.
Well, no, don't take it 5 times, because some defects you can take multiple times. Every time you take expiration date, your allowable lifespan gets shorter. You know, if you take it once, your lifespan's about 6 years. But if you take it 5 times, at the beginning of the game, the character's already dead.
Right.
So don't take it
4
5
times. 4 times is good for one session. So some are more applicable than others.
Mike, we got a couple more minutes here before we end the show, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk about Necropolis playtesting, the adventure you're working on as the tie-in to your novel, Swords of Kos Necropolis.
Yeah, Skirmisher launched its first novel. We released it in May, which sounds like it was a long time ago, but it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. And Necropolis is about 3 characters that go into a sprawling cemetery and subterranean catacombs, and what happens to them when they're there, and how they discover that the hazards of the place are not as dangerous as the place itself. Well, we decided to spin that into a full-sized adventure, and I've been working on that with a couple of people. I know you've looked at some of the parts of it. I think all of us have had something to do with Necropolis over the last few months. But John Kadoff, in particular, has been DMing that a lot and helping out with it. So Necropolis is available. The novel right now is available for anyone who's interested in reading it. The adventure will be out sometime. It's in development. What will probably be out sooner than Necropolis is the 2nd book in our Swords of Kos series. The full title of Necropolis is Swords of Kos Necropolis. The next book, as the 3 of you know, is Swords of Kos Hecaton, and Swords of Kos Hecaton is written not just by me, but by 12 different authors. So Richard Bosley has written a wonderful story called is it Chasing Shadows?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rob, you've done Eugenos and the Green Griffin. Will, you are working on one I haven't seen, titled To Be Determined.
No, the title is The Old Gods of Kos.
The Old Gods of Kos.
Yep.
And the wonderful Keith Baker, who you mentioned earlier and showed the game of, he is, I believe, working on a story for this anthology. So we've actually started to commission the art for it. 2 pieces for the Hecaton anthology came in today, and that book is going to be out in November for anyone who's interested. So the Necropolis series, the Necropolis novel, the Hecaton book, and our Swords of Kos fantasy campaign setting, they are all part of a single shared world fantasy project.
Yeah, my thing that I'm working on right now is actually will probably be the next one in the Swords of Kos series. That includes my character Eugenos from the Hecaton. So I'm really excited about that and getting that to you before the end of the year. Is my hope.
Excellent.
So we're going to end it for tonight, but we're going to go into our last word. I'm going to start with Richard tonight. Richard, what is your last word for this first episode of the Infinity Live?
I'm just really glad we got to do this. I think it's a really great idea. I'm happy that we get to share all the stuff with people, and we had an awesome guest, and looking forward to seeing everybody again for our next show, and hopefully I'll have something that I can show what I'm working on that's more exciting than research.
Well, my last word tonight is a big thank you to Daniel Burrow from Cracked Monocle and talking about his game Tephra. Again, we'll have links in the underbar, and I want to thank you guys for a great show. Will, what is your last word, sir? 2
last words, or maybe 1 and 1/2 last word. One is Richard. You'll be happy when I show you a copy of Bloodhounds. It's a role-playing game that doesn't use any modifiers, uses something totally different. And then 2, I cannot wait to show people the finished version of Defects. I've had a blast illustrating it, a blast writing it, and I want people to get some real enjoyment out of it.
Great. And Mike, you're the big guy here. Last word on the first episode of.
Last word is with the convention season out of the way, I'm in a production mode again for Skirmisher, and I am in production right now with the Jester Dragon's Book of Defects, which Will has been talking about, with Lloyd Brown III's Game Retailer Guide. We're in production with that right now. And with Dr. Eric Lee's Insults and Injuries, which is about disease and injury in fantasy role-playing games from the point of view of a medical doctor. So we are concurrently in production with all 3 of those things right now. So we're going to have a lot to talk about in the coming weeks.
That's great, and wanted to give everybody a little information about what our next shows. This is going to be a bi-weekly show. We're going to be doing this every other week.
Was it bi-monthly then?
Bi-monthly, excuse me, bi-monthly, not twice a week.
I just want to keep saying "bi" as many times as you can.
Right, exactly. So our next show will be on October 11th with a guest to be determined. The next show after that will be on October 25th. We've already got the creator of Cthulhu Live and the owner of the United States Space Marines.
The United States Marine Space Corps.
Thank you very much. And he'll be here on October 25th talking about Matt McLaughlin. We're going to talk about Cthulhu Live and scary stuff. So we're going to have a themed episode on the 25th. If you have any questions for us for next week, we're going to have a question section next time. Make sure to leave it in the underbar. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can get the links directly as they're in. On behalf of William Thrasher, Richard Balsley, and Mike Varhola, I'm Robert Gruber. Thank you and good night.